those who weren't there last week, I should say. Okay, so we began the book of Kohelet. So we began what's called in English Ecclesiastes, and we began to track last week. We're near the end of the second chapter. And so far it's been a story analysing how King Solomon got to this very dark place. He's began by talking about how difficult it seems that we don't impact the world. And remember the context which he's alluded back to. He said, I tried to understand the matter of evil, the Inyan Ra. And we understand the backstory hinted at all over here, but explicit in the Talmud and the Gemara in Gittin, which tells us that King Solomon's issue was he was trying to rectify the world and failed. He built the temple, he'd done everything, and he still hadn't brought the world to perfection, so he gave his heart. He said, nobody's ever achieved wisdom before me. Let me study evil. In other words, how do I bring even evil and everything that's negative in service of God? And it turned out it was a terrible decision, because the moment he gave evil an inch, it completely took over. Right? In other words, he'd worked his whole life, he'd suppressed the negative drives inside him. He had them locked up in the Talmud. There's a whole depiction of the story around how he tracked the demonic stuff. And then when he said to it, show me your power, because he wanted to convert it into the service of God, it turned out, it said, okay, just loosen your chain of connection to God that little bit. And next thing he knew, it showed him its power. And he became a stranger in his own mind, the way the Maharal seems to interpret that Gemara. In other words, the Gemara says it literally threw him away and became an imposter on his throne. The Maharal seems to learn that took place in his mind. In other words, his mind was now occupied territory, if you like, in the modern political words, of the negative drives. And he only had the small glimpses of sanity in this incredibly dark place. And Kohelet is written in his glimpses of sanity, which the rabbis were suspicious of it at first. They realized, even though it's chronicled from a dark place to eventual redemption, it's taking place in the moments of sanity and clarity. Any questions on all this so far? Then we looked at how he started, once he got into this very dark place of depression, of seeming hopelessness, of the fact that it was a terrible mistake, and now he's trapped by having this confused mind. He can't easily get out of it. He tries a few things, he tries simple, he tries to get work on joy, and it doesn't immediately work. He then tries to reflect on his life of happiness until then, and all the fulfillment and all the achievements he had done. All that did is, as he got to the peak, this dark mind manipulated against him, said, you see what a failure you are. And that's where he came to the point of hating life. And we really got to, in the Art Scroll, we're in chapter 2, verse 18, 19, 20 really. Because we saw that where he got to is this picture that he hated life. And then, in this middle of this really dark place, he says, 21, he says, Kish Adam Shamala B'chachma, that there's people who they work with wisdom, with das, of the Kishan Adam Shalom Abayitnena Chalkagam Zehav Ra Rabba. They'll work all their life with wisdom, and then some stranger will take all their possessions. So if you just looked at that out of any context, you'd say he sees in the world, and he'll repeat this a number of times in the book, that one person can work really hard, and then somebody else ends up taking everything away from him. But most people, that's not really what happens to. So it'd be an interesting critique of life, except if you realize that's exactly what had happened to him. As far as he's concerned, he worked all his life to build the temple, to do everything, and he got taken over by his possessed negative drives. But now he's the stranger in his own mind who's now taken over all his good. Yeah.
I had this thought the other day, if Solomon was the wisest man, he would have known about the 6,000 lifespan theory of the world.
Yeah.
Surely he would have known that he wasn't going to bring the Mashiach.
Because he's before the last 2,000 years. The last 2,000 years, Mashiach can come at any point in it, right? But he's prior to that, you're right. But the Mashiach can unfold in so many patterns and so many ways that the rabbis never hold themselves to one pattern. In fact, throughout history, many people have tried to calculate it in the book of Daniel, and they've always been wrong, or as some say, they've always been right. There's been potential points. There's been lots of unfolding. It's almost like you unfold from here to here to here to here to. So that's why we don't even hold the 6,000 as an actual fundamental of faith. It's a meta structure that we believe in, but it's not a fundamental. Okay, for that reason, because it's really something we'll only really understand when we're at the end of it, how it actually unfolded. So it's a very powerful question, that question of yours. Okay, but either way, he's got to this point now. 22. So what is it that that man can have from all the work that he does and all the stresses under the sun? All his days are full of pain and struggle. Now here comes an interesting verse. Interesting because you can read it in two different ways. Okay? You could say Ein Tov Ba'adam is a statement. It is not good for man that should eat and shasa, drink, v'heras nafsho tov, and show his soul good, but amala in his work. Gamza ra'isi aniki me'adar akimi. I has all sorts from God. That doesn't quite make sense. Is he saying it's no good? So most commentaries learn it as a rhetorical question. Is it not good to eat and to drink and to show your soul what's good in all your work? I see that's from God. 1 second, that's actually a surprisingly positive verse over here. What's happened? And I think the answer is that this is a moment that for the first time Shlomo Melech's strategy has actually begun to work. In a moment of total surrender, where he's kind of given up trying to find any way out of this, he's reduced himself to, okay, let me go and eat and drink and at least appreciate that. But the next thing that happens is, 1 second, is that not good? There is some good in that. It's like in the darkest moment, the person where all their life seems to be falling apart, and you say to them, what Noach Weinberg used to say is, imagine you say to the person who wants to jump and give up on life, okay, I accept everything. You've got the saddest story I've ever heard. But imagine you had all that and you had one extra problem as well. You'd also, in addition to everything, been blind from the day you were born. And I could give you some pill or some surgery or something that could give you eyesight. And you can imagine some people being so depressed they just wouldn't even listen. But other people thinking, 1 second, okay, that would be interesting. And you imagine you could say to such a person, now imagine you had eyesight for a few seconds for the first time in your life. Would you jump straight away? And the person thinking about it and going, I guess I'd give it a few hours. I'd want to look at the world. Maybe even a few days. Maybe I'd travel the world. Maybe 6 months. But then I'd jump at the end of that. Okay. But now imagine I could do, you start thinking the same with hearing. Same with this limb. Same with that limb. And hopefully a person might recognize, wow, do you know how blessed we are? Just the simplicity of eyesight. We actually make a bracha on it every morning. We bless God. Okay, we give sight to the blind. We just get so used to things that we forget how to appreciate them. So King Solomon's reduced now to hopelessness. The one thing you can stop and say, what's it? Then when I eat food, because that's the first thing that really is a change. Every time we eat food, there's a change. I go from hunger to satisfaction, and I get a good taste in my mouth. At that moment, I can stop and appreciate. And that turns out to be an interesting beginning, because then he says, and then he can show himself some good in the work he's done. Meaning, once a person begins the pathway of appreciation, they can thank God they have eyesight. We're billionaires, trillionaires, just by having eyesight. Because imagine, if a person didn't have eyesight, they're trillions, they'd probably trade their trillions to get their eyesight. If you offer a person trillions to lose their eyesight forever, they'd probably say no. They might think about it for a moment, but in the end they'll say no. They could never get their eyesight back again. Right? Because that means we walk the world trillionaires. Right? By having arms, by having legs, by having one friend in the world, by having one person who loves you. These are just beyond anything money could buy. But it's just we're so used to them, we focus on what we don't have. So Shlomo Melech has begun eating and drinking, and now he's begun to show himself very rapidly in the space of one verse. And then maybe there is some things he can appreciate in the work he's done, even if he realizes his life's been a failure. There are at least some things he can start showing himself that have had things to appreciate. So that's an important first step. And I realize that it's actually from God. I can find blessing in lots of things. If I stop trying to have a project of rectifying the world and minimize my ambition to just appreciation, then actually some value can come from that. Because the truth is, God, the person who has good in front of him, God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy. And to the sinner, God's given pain and anguish, etc. In other words, he's using the old expression of meaninglessness, but that's evil. In other words, when we're in the mindset of negativity, then everything becomes dark and that's empty. When we're in the mindset of positivity, there are things God's given us opportunities to have joy. So this is an amazingly subtle shift in Solomon. It's the beginning of a process. Gratitude is the beginning of the mind shift that might actually start to work. Okay? And he'll repeat versions of this verse many times through Kohelet, each time adding something slightly different. And then it leads us straight to the following thought. So now we've got gratitude, we've got an awareness that mental shift, to the extent to which we just let go and appreciate, then all of a sudden positive things, our brain becomes a wiser place, life becomes more joyful. But when we try to shift into the negative space, let's say the control space, the sinning space, and live in what that is, which he hasn't yet completely redefined, then our mind goes into all sorts of haywire states and can't get out of it. And from there he now shifts into a new modality. La Kol's Manbais. Here we begin chapter 3. There's a time for everything. La Kol Chayvetz, for every desire, Tachas HaShamayim, under the heavens. Notice we're not talking about Tachas HaShemesh, under the sun anymore. We're now talking about under the heavens. And very famous, the pairings of these 14 here. Aish HaTorah, there's a time for birth, there's a time for dying, there's a time for planting, time to uproot, time to kill, time to heal, time to burst the boundaries, time to build, time to destroy, time to build. In other words, time to cry, time to laugh, a time for mourning and a time for dancing, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to distance from embrace, a time to seek and a time to destroy, a time to guard and a time to abandon, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to think and a time to speak, a time to love, a time to hate, a time for war, a time for peace. We could spend a lot of time going through these. I'm not going to, because I want to more focus on the meta journey. But then he says, "My yison oisa asher amal." What does the one who does add in all that he does? And you think, whoa, isn't this an echo of where we started from? What have you, right? All the way back in the first chapter, third verse. My yison adam chalamara. What's good for the man? What's he adding all the work he does under the sun? So where's this taking us? But it's actually taking us because it's a different question. In the first chapter, he asked, what do I add to myself in all that I do? What do I build for myself? The focus is the self. If you look how many times the word ani has been used all the way through, you'll see there's a lot of this stuff. There's a lot of self-centered thinking. I saw, for example, verse 13, I saw for me. Verse 12, Panisiani, I turned from me. Right, verse 11, Panisiani. Everything has been about me. There's been an aspect of self-centeredness, even if it was being deployed for the good. But the self was at the center. He's begun to jettison this and start moving God to the center. And he's entered a state that you might call bitachon, trust in God. He's gone from gratitude to trust in God, understanding that there are times for different things under the sun. And perhaps I should give up on trying to control the world and just accept there are times for different things. And there was a time for me to build, and there's a time when God says, "Well, we're going to be destroyed." And if I stop trying to get the outcome, even if it's the best outcome, and just trust God to run the world, maybe that's a different mindset in which to approach things. Now again, this is not going to be the final picture, but these are two very important stages that have occurred so far. Number one, letting go and focusing on gratitude. And number two has been the focus on trusting God and accepting there's going to be different things in the world. Okay? Yeah.
Sorry, I had to ask this question because we had a few of us in Foundations had the Discovery Seminar. You know, you look at the 10 sons of Haman.
Yes.
And the layout seems quite similar and it also has the words Be'et.
Yeah, that's very true.
Is there any
link between these and those? I'm not aware of it.
Link between, was there any prediction of this?
Well, a few things. First of all, there's a few places in Torah where you get this layout. It's not the only two.
Yeah, they described it was obviously a like a prophecy.
Is it?
Released a prophecy.
Yes. The et is slightly different. To Ashkenazim we pronounce it the same, but it's actually written differently. Here, et is with an ayin, which is a guttural sound. Et, time.
Oh, it's a
So
time.
it sounds similar, but it's not
Oh,
identical.
you're right,
Okay.
Right.
Over there, you have two issues. You have the small letters that are part of our tradition to write them in, with the Taf Mission and the Zion, and all the way back in the early, I think some of the earliest manuscripts I have them. And but you also have Queen Esther saying, "If it pleases the king, do tomorrow like we done today." So the simple meaning is, hang the 10 sons to Haman. It is hunt down. We've defended ourselves today. Hunt down the leadership. Have an ideological statement that it's not who we are, but there's a hint at the potential for future prophecy there. Okay, so all of those things. Here, you're right, the bricklayer is the same, but I'm not aware of any teaching about some hidden thing in it. Yeah. Did anyone else want to answer? Okay. But now I want to show you, every verse is very subtle. So some of what I'm saying may be incorrect. I'm mainly drawing it out of the midrashic interpretations of each verse, which I'm not always explaining live, but I'm trying to give the meta picture. Now the question is no longer what does man do from ourselves, but it is still a question, what do we do in the world? And remember always, I told you, whenever I use the word ma in the book of Kohelet, what does it really mean? It's a question, but the answer is the perfected human being. Okay? But the point is he's now shifting the question from how can I do anything for me is irrelevant. But how can I do anything in the world? And he's kind of leaving that open as possibly not. God is running everything in the world and maybe I can't do anything. Maybe my purpose in the world is to let go. Maybe that was my big mistake. I see exactly what God gave us to afflict us with. Why? Because everything is made beautiful in its time. Remember that word. I told us a few words you have to always focus on, and one of them is kol. He just introduced this chapter with that kol's in that place. For everything, right, in the beginning, everything seemed meaningless. But now we're seeing actually everything is the way God wants it to be. Sometimes it'll work really well, like I thought I was doing amazingly building the temple, and sometimes God will wreck everything, like now's the time for destruction. Everything is in its right time. Knowing that man is placed in heart, this vexing attempt to understand the world, where in fact man will never understand. Maybe at the end we will, but during history we will never understand. So to the extent to which we want to understand and control the world is a frustrating place. To the extent to which we're willing to let go, I accept that God's put everything in its place and I can't understand it. And that's as far. So this is a place of immense trust in God. This is a very fundamental shift. From earlier Shlomo Melech, King Solomon also trusted God. He wrote the book of Proverbs and Mishlei, right? He's written the book of Song of Songs by now. He knows what life's about. But he thought, I know what God's end goal is, and I trust that God will help me get there. Now he's changed from, even if I know what the end goal is, I should actually trust God that I have no clue how we're going to get there. It's a different mindset. I just have to accept that God is running everything, and there's nothing that I know how to add into the world, and I'll just have to go with the flow and wait. That's kind of where he's at, and accept that God is going to engineer everything to work out, and accept that I do not understand. I thought I understood, and I thought that I was one shortcut away from ending history, and I now realize that was a terrible mistake. And actually, where I thought the problem was just understanding evil and how to manipulate it for the good, now I realize the problem was trying to control in the first place. I should have let go. I should let God guide me and let God decide if it was the right time. If it wasn't the right time, it wasn't the right time. And that's where I should have gone. So these are profound and subtle shifts that King Solomon's bringing out here. Yodati, and I knew, verse 12, at this point, all I now realize is that all I should do is just appreciate life and rejoice in life. Rejoice in the fact that God's in charge and not me. Every human being who eats and drinks, and sees good appreciates their life and all the work they've done, even if, largely speaking, it's a failure, but they look for the good. It's a gift from God. Yodati, I knew, all that God does, that will be forever. We cannot add to it, and from it we cannot detract. God did all of this so that we have, it's a difficult word to translate into Hebrew, into English, but maybe fear God is the most natural, or be in some kind of state of awe of God. In other words, the letting go comes with certain powerful things. We can still appreciate and enjoy life as kind of spectators, and we can also have an awe of God, saying, God, I can't rectify this world, it's for you to do. So this letting go produces a profound set of senses of the religious experience and joy that comes from letting go, trying to control the world. Ma shahaya kvaru, that which was already is. Right? The past is now built, that part of creation that needs to be done. Vashaliyos, and that which is now or is becoming kvahaya, in some way already was. But God will seek out the person who's been pursued. He's talking about himself, has been pursued by his own dark thoughts and their own negative drives. So says God, you know what? Says King Solomon, I can't change the world. God will look after everyone who's suffering. God's going to do this, God's going to do that. And this can induce in me the right type of mindset that I was wanting to get out of. And this is my way out of the dark thoughts. And I also saw under the sun some makom mishpat shama haresha. I do understand, I'm not being naive, says King Solomon. I get the fact that where there's justice, there's also evil. Makom tzedek so much, where there's good judgments, there's also bad. Where there's justice, there's also evil. So I'm not being naive and just saying, oh, the world is amazing. No. But I'm accepting that God is the one who has to redeem the world. I accept, that's the point of line I think of it. I'm not being naive. And now he says, okay, but now that I've come this far, now maybe I can go into now that I've got all this pathway to joy and pathway to fearing God, now maybe I can do what I tried to do a chapter and a half ago, which was to go into the heart and finally rectify the dark places and shine the light there. Before it failed because I tried to use wisdom, but I was also holding on to foolishness. But now maybe that I have let go, and that I have let joy enter my heart, maybe now I can go back into the dark recesses and clear away all the depressing thoughts and so on. He tries. Verse 17, Amarti ani belibi. He's using the word ani again. Me. Using the word belibi in my heart. I said in my heart, God will do justice for the good and the bad, the righteous and the wicked. Look, dark heart, don't vex me by telling me that the world's hopeless and useless, because I trust that God, right now it looks that way, but in the end God will bring everything into justice. And I can't bring everything to justice. I can't rectify the world, but God can. So he's now trying to tame and win over the dark parts of the heart. However, he's not ready for it. This doesn't work. Once again I say in my heart, no. Once I'm speaking in the heart, and now my heart starts taking over, and the heart always symbolizes, in this stage at least in the book, the negative darkened drives. Now, sorry, I'll just find I have noted that I wanted to bring out. So I lost the placement and fell to the ground. Yeah. Yes, it may be true that Bnei Adam live from, that God has chosen people, however, ultimately, it may be that humans, God has some kind of vision for humanity, but his negative drives now turn around to go, ultimately they're just the same as an animal. On this picture of the world, what are humans? Just observers. We're just meant to sit back and relax and let God run the show, and we're meant to basically say we're just animals. What's the difference between us and an animal? If we do nothing, then essentially we're just more observant animals. So the darkness has fought back, right? Okay, but King Solomon now has a tool when the darkness fights back to resist it. He hasn't got the power to conquer the darkness, but it doesn't have the power to conquer him. So the dark voice comes back and says, well, very nice hypothesis that we should just let go and let God run the world, but then you're just telling me I'm an animal. So a human is chosen for what exactly? To do what? Right? That's the kind of dialogue now. We're going to die just like animals. You're just saying there's one spirit really in the world, which is God will do whatever he wants to anyway. In that case, man really does nothing more than animals, because all our contribution is meaningless. The destiny of everything is the same. Everything comes from the dust. Everything returns to the dust. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upwards, Lawrence, and the spirit of the animal goes down in earth. According to you, now where you do nothing, why shall that be? Now the second hint, by the way, the third key word to focus on. We focus on the word kol, all. We've already seen it shift several times in the book, and have actually skimmed over some of the deep ramifications of that. But we've also noticed the word ma. Whenever King Solomon asks ma, the real answer to the complete human being, there's a third word you have to focus on, me. I may have said this last time. Whenever King Solomon says who, the real answer is God. But it means right now you can't see God. So you ask the question who. I think I said this last time, and that's why me is gematria 50, ma is 45, which is gematria Adam, me is gematria 50, like the 50 levels of wisdom. And so here he says, who knows? He's hinting God knows this. But from our perspective down here, I don't see the value of the human being at all. So now his dark voice has fought back. He doesn't have this idea of letting go is okay to help him achieve one thing, but it doesn't conquer the evil because it's got a reply. It's got a really good question. So what does King Solomon do? I stopped fighting my dark side because it doesn't work. I can't conquer it, but I can retreat to this place of appreciation once again. Take joy in my actions, even whether they achieve anything or not, I can at least enjoy them. Because that's my only portion. Look how beautiful this verse is. Who will bring the person to see what will be afterwards? The over meaning, I don't get in this world, I don't understand the value of my contribution. But listen deeply to the words. Me means God. Ma means the completed human being. Look how this code works over here. It's such a beautiful code once you've got it. Because God will bring the person to see when they've achieved completion that will be at the end. Isn't that amazing? Every time he throws the question, it really has the answer built into it. And you see how the me and the man integrates. So what's the meaning of that? The meaning is King Solomon does know that in the end there is an answer. But when we're looking at the world now, we can't see that answer. So the overt meaning is, who knows what the good is? The subtle meaning is, God will show us when we've achieved completion. And the combination of the two is, I appreciate that it's true, but I can't see it. And because I can't see the value of the human being, I can't conquer my evil drives, but my pattern of appreciation is enough that it can't conquer me either. So what we've done so far through the process of letting go, the process of gratitude, the process of trusting God, the process of fearing God, meaning appreciating the awe of God being in charge and we can't really, we've got to let go of the center, is we've achieved enough that it's an antidote to the negative drives taking us over, but it's not enough to achieve a tikkun of them, because there's a counter voice now that says, okay, so your life actually is meaningless, you really do nothing. Now at the moment we say, okay fine, but let me just appreciate that is everything I have, and I accept that it seems to me like it's valued, but somewhere God's got the answer in the distance, and I trust God on that too. And that's kind of where we got to. So if we were to end the book here, we would have an antidote to the dark thoughts, but not yet a full tikkun. But someone might say, okay, fine, that's where I was before I started doing this. And that's okay. Okay. He's happy with that, he's content with that, which is a big shift from where he was before. And it teaches us in our life, if we ever get into this dark place, the bedrock is to start with these things. Or even without being in a dark place, start with appreciation, move on to letting go, move on to trusting, or start with letting go, move to appreciation, move to complete trust of God, and just total and complete trust of God, even when nothing makes sense to us. However, he's about to explain why we need more than this. We can't just stay here. Because that question the dark side asks can actually be shifted slightly and become a question even for the good side. And now chapter 4 begins. Here is not such a bad place to put the beginning of the chapter. Sometimes they put them in quite a decent place. V'shavti I sat down for Era and I saw as kol ha'ashukim, all the oppressed people, bless you, asher nasim tachas hashamash, who were made under the sun. Hine dimas ha'ashukim, behold the tears of the oppressed. Ve'ein lahem menachem, who have no one to comfort them. U'miyadosh ke'em, in the hands of their oppressors is koyach, is power. Ve'ein lahem menachem, there's no one to comfort. What is he saying right now? He's saying it's all very nice for me to trust God, but there's people out there crying and suffering. I'm just meant to say, okay, don't worry, just trust God. There's people in pain. Okay, my dark side said I don't get what the value of you in an animal. I don't need to listen to that, right? But when I look around again and see how much pain and suffering there is, there's a kid over here who's been abused and his life hurt, or his life is shattered and broken. Somebody else brought up in it where their loved one has died. And I just meant to say, okay, just trust God. Really? And God's put me in this world and seen all this stuff. So this is now a positive challenge to where he's got to so far. Okay, but it is a real challenge that suggests it's not enough. He can't be satisfied with the equilibrium with having an antidote to the negative. Gratitude, letting go of gratitude and trust is something, but it cannot be enough. There's more work to still do. And now comes a remarkable set of shifts. He says, and I praised the dead who have already died, from the living who are still alive. Now that sounds like a very depressing place to be. But of course he understands at this point there is a benefit. In the end we'll see the difference, right? But then he says, both of them, the one who has not yet lived, who has not seen the evil made under the sun. So this is the whole point of what it pains him about the reason he'd rather not be in the world is, if I'm powerless to impact the world, and there's people struggling who I cannot ignore, then I'm just saying, well, what can I do? Just wish to end this world already? To get to the other side, when at least God will finally rectify the world? So long as I'm traveling through the world, if I can't do everything, then this actually becomes extremely painful. I saw all the work. That's called Kishron HaMaaseh, and all the you might translate this as skills, talents of the actions. All that we have in this world is jealousies. This is also terrible, empty, meaningless. The fool claps his hands and eats his own flesh. So, right? Okay. Now, before we go on, you should notice, to analyze where we're at right now, which is a critique of where we've been till now. It's not a return to the old state. It's a critique of just having this pattern of let go, appreciate, trust. But there's something else built in here. All the way through these verses are the constant hints back to the Garden of Eden. Then if you notice them. Starting with the fact the word Eden is here twice. Look at this, right? If you look at the Hebrew, verse 2 ends with the word Aden. Verse 3, Aden is the time, right? You have these time words, those who have, they're still living, those who have not yet come into being. This is the Garden of Eden, of the world that is yet to be, or the world that is the completion of time. This is being hinted at. We've got the word, with Cain. Cain is over here. You write verse 4, Kinas Ishmere'eu, the word for jealousy is the same as the Hebrew word Cain. Of course the word Havel has been all the way through, which means meaninglessness. So we've got Garden of Eden, we've got the jealousy that brought the end to the Garden of Eden, we've got Cain, right, in the name Cain, we've got the name jealousy and the name meaninglessness. All the elements here, death and life, the living and the dead, that was the tree of life and the tree of death. So there's a lot happening over here that's kind of hinting back to the Garden of Eden, and there's a deep point here. It seems, I think, that Kohelet is rooting the struggle and pain of the human being in the sin of the Garden of Eden, and understanding that if we can get back to thinking about this sin diagnosing it correctly, then we might have the beginning of an answer to how to balance trusting God on the one hand with the pain of the human being on the other hand. Yeah.
Could it also be Pasuk 4, where it says, I saw that all the labor, it says like, all that labor leads to the man's rivalry and jealousy,
Yeah.
and labor was introduced after they were kicked out of
Very
it.
good, excellent, excellent, very, very nice insight, beautiful. The point of what is, by the way, the fool clapping his hands and killing, there's a medrash that about Lemech clapping his hands and killing his own child. I'm not going to go into every hint over here that is in the Genesis chapter, but there's a lot of hints over here back to those pieces of stuff in Genesis. Now, it's worth understanding because, of course, when Cain is created, it says, Kamisi is Hashem, I've acquired the man of God. And then Cain becomes jealous of Havel. So Kina and Cain, they're all related, right? Okay, lots of hints over here. But the point is this, the Garden of Eden, without over-elaborating on the story, is the story of the journey away from seeing the world through God's eye perspective. It's at least Maimonides' interpretation of the second chapter of the Guide, that before the sin, they knew not good and bad, but truth and falsehood, reality and illusion. Tov and Ra, good and bad, are subjective words. Things feel good. Good and bad describes feelings, out of which we then try to evaluate ethics. Not only that, but the entire vocabulary of ethics is taken from aesthetics. So we'll describe aesthetics, how things look, sound, smell, taste, or feel. We'll say if they're positive sensations, we'll describe them as good, beautiful, wonderful, or amazing. And we'll describe positive ethical acts as good, beautiful, wonderful, or amazing. And conversely, we will describe negative aesthetic sensations as bad, disgusting, horrible, or revolting. And we'll describe immoral behavior as bad, disgusting, horrible, or revolting. Which means when we know the world of good and bad, we don't immediately apprehend choices by how they look to God. We apprehend them by how they feel to us. We become the center of reality. We become the subjective beings whose feelings determine what's right and wrong in the world. And that is catastrophic. Because in place of a single soul of man who can relate to God, we now have many shattered fragments of the original Adam, each of whom believes they're the center of reality. And after that comes the next generation, jealousy and emptiness, Cain and Havel, until we eventually get a third child who can get things right. When you start that journey. And so, Kohelet is saying we're in a broken world. We're in a post-Eden world. And wasn't it God who instructed us to restore the world? So my challenge as Kohelet to my, not complacency, but my letting go attitude, which seemed to get me quite far, is okay, but 1 second, there's a world of pain. A world in which each of us sees the world through our eyes, subjectively. I see it one way, you see it the other way. That means I'm threatened by you, and you're threatened by me, and I'm jealous of you, and you're jealous of me. And this is the world we're in. This broken, shattered life, death, souls coming into the world, out of the world. I praise those who are still in the Garden of Eden, says Solomon, who have not even come to this world, because in this world, we're just in this world of brokenness and pain and suffering, and people are really crying and hurt. So I can't just accept it. Surely God wants me to do something about it. That's why He's made this world so painful. Do you see what He's doing? It's a beautiful... Once you recognize, I think once these clues in Kohelet, you see how Chazal see it, it's not just going back around in a circle. Each time He's adding a new layer, challenging the old, not rejecting it, but saying it's not enough. It's true. What He said so far is true. You do need to let go. We do need to have appreciation. We do need to trust God completely. But then we've got to also add the sin of Adam, and we've got to do something about it. Yeah.
I know you said there's a lot of stuff behind Pasuk 5, but what does that mean even simply? I don't even understand what that means.
Okay. The simple thing is that a fool, what they rejoice in clapping their hands, is self-destruction. Right? So the world is full of people, but that's part of the world's full of people being oppressed by other people. But the world is also full of people who are hurting themselves. Right? That's something else over there. And then he says like this. I just get a very brief story. Rashi brings on the Torah that Lemech said to his, Lemech is the one who ended up killing Cain. Cain was the one who said, Hashem says to Cain, you have a pathway if you improve. And he says it was only jealousy that caused him to be angry in the first place. That's how the Ramban understands it. But in the end, Cain was killed by his own flesh, his own descendant, who also brought his hands together and killed his own child. Right? Which is this. Lemech says to his wives, Adon and Sila, hear my voice, his wives. But Lemech, it's a verse in Bereshit 4, chapter 4, 23. Right? His wives had separated it from him, said Rashi, because he'd killed Cain and Tuval Cain, his own son. What happened? Lemech was blind. Tuval Cain used to lead him, and he was an excellent archer. So Tuval Cain would show him how to point the arrow, and Lemech would fire it and kill. And Tuval Cain thought he was being carried, he was actually riding on his son. His son thought he saw an animal in the distance, told him, 12 o'clock, shoot. He fired, and then he realized he killed his own grandfather, Cain. He smashed his hands together in agony and didn't realize he smashed his own child and ended up killing him. Right? So the hints, by the way, in these verses are this: Cain, then smashing your hands and killing your own, right? What's going on? Why is that important in the Torah to read about? Because the tragic end of Cain is like a metaphor for self-destruction that jealousy brings. Once we enter a world where there's so much jealousy of one another, that's the world where one kills themselves in the end. And we get killed by our own family that kills that. It's a basis. So what King Solomon is, what he's saying over here is, we're in the world of the sin of man. We're in the world of intense suffering. We're in the world where people are oppressed, and we're in the world where jealousy leads them to their own destruction. The fool gets to their own destruction. But it's a painful world to watch. It's not good enough just to say, I trust God. Surely there's got to be something I'm meant to do with this. If I'm just a passive observer, then I'd rather wait till the end of life and get out of this world and be dead already. And even better, those who've never even lived in this world, right? That's now that's not a return to the earlier state, it's an advancement on it. Okay? Because now we need to work out a way forward. Okay. Now comes an amazing little insight. Verse 7. Then I looked and I saw Havel. Right? Again, if you understand the hints of the Garden of Eden. And I see Cain, the terrible way he ends up, but I also see Havel. But of course the simple meaning is I see meaninglessness. What is the meaninglessness? Yesh echad ve'ein sheni. But remember the double hints. King Solomon's speaking very often through this book in double language. So the simple language is, there's an emptiness in the world. There is one and not two. Yesh echad ve'ein sheni. There's one and not two. Gam bein v'ach. There's a son and a brother. Ein lo, he doesn't have. Ve'ein keitz chalamolo. There's no limit to all his work. Gam ein lo sispa. Oshe, his eyes will never be satisfied with wealth. Ulumi amel, for whom am I working? Umachasas nafshi, and putting away my soul. Mitova gamza havel ve'inyan rahu. This also havel and a bad thing. But let's pick up the hint that we're talking about the Garden of Eden. I looked at Havel. Then I see there is one brother and not two. What's that referring to? Cain has killed Havel. So I look at Cain and his self-destructiveness, and then I look at Havel and how he ends up getting killed, and now Cain is actually lonely. It's a continuation, right? And I see that all the work he does is destroyed his own soul, and that's also Havel, i.e. the destruction of his own soul has destroyed Havel, and this is the matter of evil. So my conclusion is 2 is better than 1. That they have reward in their work. Now you could say this is just like an observation. If only Cain had killed Havel, 2 is better than 1. Meaning the jealous person thinks they get something by destroying the other. But actually they needed the other. Anyone we're jealous of is really somebody we need. That's why we're trying to control them, because they have something we want. We're right to want it. It's a very profound insight, bless you. Jealousy is a subtle step away from, it's really the flip side of admiration, and the flip side of the recognition of our interdependence on the other. But so long as we're trying to control the world, we will have to therefore possess that person and dispossess them. But if we stop thinking of the world in that paradigm and started thinking about it in a relationship dynamic where you've got something I don't have, maybe I've got something you don't have, I need you. The one I'm jealous of, I need to change my mind into admiration for, and then ask for partnership with. That's a powerful mindset he set himself in. Yeah.
How does that play out in the story of Joseph and his brothers?
It's exactly the same thing. The brothers were jealous of Joseph, but they needed what he had, and they should have worked with him in partnership.
What did he have to do?
the ability to build a world where they need him. That's what he saw in the dreams right from the word go. And that's what ended up happening. But it wasn't a threat to them. If they had understood it correctly, that allowed them to become themselves. The deep secret of the world that he's hinting at right now is, so long as we're in the paradigm of the sin of Adam, we're always in that paradigm where everything you have that I don't have is a threat to me. So long as I'm God's center of the world, which is the sin of man, so long as my subjective bubble, right, your subjective bubble, put us at the center of reality, we're in danger, we're colliding with people all the time. But so long as I realize what we're building here is Adam in the Garden of Eden, where all of us are actually part of this oneness, then you must have something I don't have. Like every cell in the body looks at every other cell. You have something I don't have. Every tissue has something. The liver doesn't want the kidney to be a liver. What a disaster if it took over the kidney and turned it into a liver. That would be a real catastrophe. I need you to be different to me. I need you to do what you can do that I can't do. And this is now what King Solomon's coming to. Right? He can't necessarily rectify the world out there, but he can shift his attitude in here. Right? And if you can get, right, let's have a look at how this now plays out, because this just otherwise feels like another random wise insight in the middle of the book. But it's not, it flows exactly from the verses before. If one of them falls, the friend will lift him. Whereas if you're in a world where you're going to be the center, when you fall, there's no one to lift you. Right? This is now a very powerful reflection on himself. Maybe I needed partners in my biggest moments of life to lift me. Right? Two can actually produce warmth in a way that one never can. Right? If one is attacked, the second can defend him. Now if I can bring a third person in, the third thread will not unravel very quickly. Then he says, so this is now an amazing place to be at in this book so far, okay? Is he's got to this amazing place where he realizes that part of the antidote to the sin of man is to stop thinking of ourselves at the center, but to look for, not to let go of the world either, just let go, but to start to view the world in the sense of relationship. Everyone in the world has something to build together, that we can build the oneness. And to whatever extent we can contribute to that, we're going to help alleviate suffering. Because suffering comes from two sources. One is people being oppressed by others, but two is people's own jealousy and self-centeredness. Also they become a victim. And helping people get beyond that is key. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I wanted to just repeat back the flow. So basically he's dealing with this evil side to him. He's realizing at first to put it at bay, there's letting go, gratitude, trust in God.
Yeah.
And then he says, well, that's fine, but there's still all this suffering that brings me suffering, as in looking at all the suffering in the world.
Yeah.
And the flow there is, well, focus on the suffering that I can do anything
The
about.
flow is let's diagnose it. The diagnosis is the garden, the sin of man, self-centeredness. And therefore my life, the one thing I should be doing, even if I can't rectify the world, is focusing on relationships. Focusing on me at least, seeing the world outside the prism of self-centeredness, and me at least learning, each one of us individually, trying to focus on the power of relationship, trying to convert jealousy into admiration, and a picture of the world in which ultimately we all have to become one. Right? That becomes a philosophical perspective. Now, for the first time in the book, I think we'll end with this next verse, I think, is he's going to, although it takes a few minutes to fully draw out, he's going to finally address his sin. Tov Yeled Miskin. Better is the poor child, the Chacham, who is wise, Mimelech Zaken, from the old king, Uksil, who is a fool, Asher Le'yada Lehizaher Oit, who does not know how to guard himself anymore. What's going on? He's addressing his mistake. He's clear that the work he did as a youthful king, he's saying surely about himself. Who was the youthful king who was wise? Him. Who was the older king who was the fool? Him. You see what he's saying? The king he'd been when he was younger, right, had been a Solomon who controlled his Yetzer Hara, his negative drives. The later version in life actually released it and expressed it. But there's an even more subtle message. The Yetzer Hara is the foolish voice. Ordinarily, we associate that voice with foolishness, with childishness. right? It's a very childish voice, and it's very short-term thinking. It just wants, I want it all and I want it now. Right? The mature adult is surely the other voice. But he's actually saying, ordinarily you think of the two, the adult is the older senior partner. Rav Moti Berger, I remember, used to say this: if you're made up of a child and an adult inside you, which one is the senior partner? The child has been around longer. The child has been there from birth. The adult only started when we're about a mitzvah and kind of only get to any degree of maturity by the time we're 20. When you're 20 years old, we're a 20-year-old child versus a 7-year-old adult. Right? When we're 30 years old, right, so then we're still a bit of a, but hopefully as life goes on, actually there's a hint over here. I read there's a medrash that says like this: Tov yeled miskin v'chacham. Better is the child who is, let's say, poor and wise. That's before he's built the temple and built his own house. That's the Yetzer Tov, right? Why do we call the Yetzer Tov a child? Because it only enters the person when they're 13 years old. So it's always the child. It's always, ironically, it's the more childish voices. Meaning, you can look at it as child each way around, but it's the younger partner, right? And why do we call it miskin, a poor person? Because nobody listens to it, right? And why do we call it wise? Because it teaches the way of the straightness. The king who's old, why is he called a king? Because that's the voice that gets listened to the most. Why is it called old? Because it's been there from birth. See? So our voice we want to call the child is actually the older voice inside us. The voice we want to call the mature voice is the child in terms of it's the younger voice that doesn't get listened to. And this amazing insight that Moses is bringing into King Solomon is he's getting what's going on in life, is that I need is that part of the reason we're always at the disadvantage is a voice that can masquerade as wisdom is in fact the childish voice. But it's the older voice, it's the senior partner. The junior partner is the adult voice, that's much younger. Right? That's what he's bringing out over here. And because now it says, because it leaves prison and comes out to rule. What's that? He let his negative drives come out and he had them imprisoned, and now they've come out to rule. This is like, once you understand the story, you realize this is now his first reconstruction of the story explicitly, but now with a lot of perspective. Okay, maybe we'll start from here next time. Even in kingship, he's born poor. Right? Okay, fine. So we're gonna pause over here. The one who's imprisoned who became the king is definitely the demonic side that Solomon had imprisoned, which he then emerged to become a king. Right? In that case, the second half of the verse would imply that even when it takes over the king himself, it never really becomes a king, because it's always been an imposter. But the other meaning that could be like this: the reason why the poor wise youth is better than the old foolish king is because it can become a king again. So there's really two different ways. This verse can be read in two different ways. Either way, what happens is he's referring to the fact there's two voices in him, one of which is taken over, and and that which was imprisoned took over, but that which currently is might also then take over. The two voices can kind of turn around in life. So where we got to so far is we don't have a full resolution. We've gone through a whole opening, certain efforts that didn't work. We then came to letting go, to appreciation and trusting God that leads to joy and fear of God. We then came to the fact that's not enough to conquer the negative drive, but it's enough to hold our own. And then we came to 1 second, but the world's full of suffering. We diagnosed it into the Garden of Eden. It's an echo of the original sin of man and the jealousy. The solution is to look at the world, everyone you look at is a partner with us, as somebody from whom I have to learn and to grow. And then we've kind of come and I said, okay, I can see at this point, I now get that I should never have listened to that voice. Meaning, when Solomon said, surely I should unleash evil to understand it and control it, he should have known it was much more powerful than him. It's been around longer, and that it's constantly playing a trick on him. The error was that little amount of self-centeredness had thought of the world that way. That was a tiny amount of self-centeredness. It was motivated in terms of God. But he was doing it himself. He wasn't seeking advice of others. He was a little bit epicentric, which means he still had a tiny vestige, of the Garden of Eden. He was seeing the world through his eyes, where he's meant to be the hero who rectifies the world. And you should never underestimate the power of the dark side of the Force. And never underestimate the power of that voice, because it's cleverer than we are. It's been around longer, which means the minute we're doing anything in our own way, even good, with us as kind of moved to the center, this thing can throw us out of prison and take us over and put us in prison. So now he's gained enormous insight. He hasn't yet solved everything, but he's beginning to shift. And for the next few chapters will be a series of philosophical reflections. Okay? And he's going to now start to reshape the world, thinking everything through until he can finally answer this question that he's thrown out here, which will eventually lead him to answers to all the questions everything began with. So, yeah, so let's remember we are up to chapter 4, verse 14. No, verse 15, I should say. And we're near the end of chapter 4, but I think it's a good place to pause anyway. It's only the chapter's not perfect anyway, so we'll stop.
Yeah.